Despite having received hundreds of changes throughout its 4-year lifespan, too many, Apex is in a worse state than where it was when it began all the way back in 2019. I myself definitely have asked myself the same question over and over again, and I've been finding myself asking it more frequently as of late. So I decided to enter my time machine and go back to the first few seasons of Apex, to what many consider the peak times of Apex, to compare the state of the game back then to the version of Apex that we have today, to determine whether people are right in their views or if they are blinded by nostalgia. So today I'll answer the question that we've all been asking, probably way too much by now: was the old Apex Legends any better? So before we even begin with diving into the actual video, I have to determine what I consider the peak of Apex. Personally, thinking back and trying to avoid the nostalgia goggles too much, I would say that Season 2 has to be around the best time of Apex, right? You know, Season 1 was decent, but had a lot of issues and really lacked that polish, in my opinion. Whereas Season 3 just felt kind of mid when compared to Season 2. Anyways, the more scientific approach would be using the player base data to look for the peak of the game's player base before and, if it started dwindling from then. But seeing as EA doesn't release their player count data like Steam does, there's no way of knowing how the player graphs looked before late 2020 when Apex was released on Steam. Anyways, so that's why we're going by saying Season 2 is the peak of Apex. If you do disagree, let me know in the comments, but watch the video anyways, because you got this far, right? So let's start off the video with the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to going back in time: the legend balance. Because Apex has had quite a lot of different metas throughout the years, and before Seer was dominating the meta, we did actually have Gibraltar for a little while. Actually, for a year straight, or even more, and before that we had a campy meta, with the deathmatch looking meta coming way before that, so naturally there are going to be some differences between the Season 2 meta and the legend balance that we see today. Now obviously, Wattson did lead the charge, get it? Haha. Very funny. Enabling the more camp-style meta all the way back in Season 2, but it was a fresh change from the overall chaotic meta that we had seen across all facets of play. And it made professional games feel a lot more bearable and less chaotic with hundreds of grenades. However, Season 2 did not only feature Wattson, but plenty of changes to other legends, with Fortified now taking even less damage and no longer being slowed by bullets, as well as the introduction of the ranked mode, which immediately took use of that slower, more methodical, deliberate playstyle that Wattson and her company enabled, and it was great. Despite there being more campy legends in the upper echelons of ranked, you'd still see plenty of teams running all types of compositions across mid to lower ranked and in public matches alike. Just like how you don't really see Wattsons or Sears in a typical public match today. And playing slow and campy was almost frowned upon, and immediately punished in the wrong types of lobbies. It was around this time that we started seeing some more Gibraltar playtime as a counter to the overwhelming amount of passive Wattson teams, but he didn't really start dominating the meta and become a must-pick just yet. It's safe to say that despite some campiness, I still prefer the Season 2 Legend meta over the one that we have now, especially when it comes to the highest levels of play, as all we see are Valkyrie, Seer, and a different third legend in almost every team, and those legends are just so boring to play and just so boring to watch. And while Wattson helped turn the game from a chaotic playstyle into something at least slightly more organized, I believe that the weapon meta made a much larger turn with the introduction of Season 2. The fresh gun for Season 2 was the L-Star EMG, and no, it was not nearly as strong as it is coming out of the Season 17 care package. It was really just a nuisance to use with way less damage, but hey, at least it came with a Digithreat, which was kinda cool for an LMG weapon, right? But again, it wasn't really that big of a deal. Now, to be fair, Season 2 did come with the introduction of the Disruptors and the Hammer Points. And as much as I want to defend the weapon meta, these things were awful to deal with. The Disruptor Alternator in the first few days of its release was insane, where it dealt 33 damage against armor with a 2.26 damage multiplier. You could also equip the Alternator and other SMGs with the 3x and even the 2 to 4 times ACOG scopes, which was mostly a cool thing, but it definitely didn't help if combined with Disruptor rounds. The added magnification allowed you to fully shred full team's armors from really far away. Thankfully, Respawn did release a hotfix to a more reasonable 1.7 multiplier, but it was still strong enough to be a must-pick in the meta. But along the Disruptors, we did see some more traditional guns still being viable picks. The Peacekeeper was actually buffed with Season 2 and was a great secondary, especially with the combination of the Alternator which, if I think about it, feels really weird to say now, since almost nobody actually chooses to run a Peacekeeper, let alone a shotgun these days. In Season 17, everyone seems to be running a full auto weapon coupled with another full auto weapon, or maybe a marksman or sniper, and the gunfights just don't feel as nice and personal as they did back in Season 2. So, another point for Season 2, I guess. The cheated situation will be quite a bit different if you compare, Season 2 and Season 17. I mean, back in Season 2, we just got ranked and lots of people wanted to get to a high rank, and there was lots of incentive to cheat, but there weren't really any defensive anti-cheat systems in place. So, it took forever for reports to go through and for cheaters to actually get banned. They could be playing for days or weeks without actually, getting punished, because we were relying on a manual ban system or very slow ban waves, and we had to manually message developers to actually get a proven cheater banned. It wasn't rare to see a cheater every few games, or, God forbid, on peak hours, if you were really unlucky, there would be a cheater in almost, if not every game. And as for Season 17, nearly 4 years later, I am sure they figured it out and that things are different. Don't get me wrong, Apex has had stacks since the dawn of time. It's literally the way that they want you to play the game. But there's a massive difference between some dudes playing together and a full team pushing with perfect synergy like SEAL Team 6. And there's definitely more of the latter in Season 17. Now, this might be a symptom of matchmaking, but honestly, it's more of a symptom of more players turning stackers than anything else. Since there were more solo players, or at the very least the stacks were more casual in Season 2, I will have to give this point to Season 2 as well. I'm sorry, I have to bring this up because as a mouse and keyboard enjoyer, my own enjoyment, and I'm sure the enjoyment of many other PC players, is based on how many controller players there are. If there is an abundance of controller users, it's just not as enjoyable as when the mouse and keyboard players were the majority. Back in Season 2, we didn't have crossplay, so there was no console influence, and there were really only a handful of controller players on PC overall. I remember seeing my first controller player in a scrim late Season 3 or 4 maybe even, and thinking that, wow, this guy doesn't have human aim. He's actually aimbotting, because the aim just looks so unnatural. Little did I know, it was just his thumps. I'm just a silly goose. I'll acknowledge that I do have a bias, but I will still say that as far as the controller population goes, at least as a mouse and keyboard player, it was a lot better in Season 2. Sue me. So what about TTVs? Or what the average player usually calls cringe sweats. The movements, zipline dancing, streamer building, fragment dropping, Wraith Andes. While it will be really hard to get data on this, all we can do is think back. Back in Season 2, the community was a lot less sweaty on average, and as such the ratio of sweaty Wraiths simply had to be lower. If we add on to the fact that content creators like Lyric, Fade, and all of your favorite movement Wraith streamers didn't enter the scene and have their respective copycats until much later, it is safe to say that we had way less TTVs back in Season 2. So I will have to give another point to Season 2 on this as well. But what about the map pool? Obviously back in Season 2, we didn't have Stormpoint, we didn't have Olympus, we didn't have Broken Moon, which is a massive plus to me. But we also didn't have World's Edge until Season 3, which sucks because that's easily my favorite map. That being said, with Season 2 we got some slight changes with the Space Cows walking into the map and wreaking some havoc, and the games flowed pretty naturally, which was great. And not only that, but we still had the proper Skull Town in Season 2, which I still miss every single day. So in short, Season 2 has Skull Town, and we didn't have to play Olympus, Stormpoint, or Broken Moon, so despite lacking World's Edge, that's another win for Season 2. Now, the value of ranked in Season 2 being, I guess, more compared to the one we have today is a bit of a no-brainer. And, even though the ranked rewards still weren't that good, at the time you would get rewarded with a unique dive trail, with Respawn sort of alluding that they would bring new dive trails every season. The Season 2 Predator dive trail was a unique dive trail that you could only get back then, and it's one of the only dive trails that still don't get retired every season, whereas by Season 17, they are rotating the same few trails every few seasons. As far as the community went, since ranked was so new, there was a lot more value and a lot more prestige behind getting a good rank compared to today. I mean, Season 17's ranked is turning out to be a bit of a joke, where everyone seems to be able to rat all the way to Master, so saying that ranked isn't worth that much anymore is probably a little bit of an understatement. So, another dub for Season 2. There are a few points to discuss when it comes to content and grindable rewards. Obviously, we'll skip mentioning ranked as we already mentioned it in the previous section. Season 2's Battle Pass rewards and badges were a little bit grindy, but were a massive step up from Season 1, where users were expected to spend more than a third of their waking hour just to get some animated badges. and as far as Season 2 went, it's safe to say that it was a lot more realistic. But when you compare the reasonable events and rewards to Season 17, things get a bit more wacky. While Season 2 didn't have too many new things content-wise, the rewards that we actually did get fit the grind. Whereas the weapon mastery system expects you to grind over 100 hours per weapon to thousands of hours to max it out, all for a badge and some non-unique skins. Obviously the content itself will be better in Season 17, but if we look back the last few seasons, most events are just an excuse to sell recolored skins, and usually, if we're lucky at this point, just bring back the same LTM over and over again, whereas in Season 2, every event, even though it necessarily wasn't the bee's knees, was completely fresh, completely new, and super fun to play in as an addition to the Battle Royale game mode. The skins that we got were also pretty decent, or at the very least, not just recolors. They tried to spice it up at least a little bit. This does feel like a bit of a toss-up, but in my opinion, because it was all fresh at the time, I feel like Season 2 takes the cake again. So, we're at the end of the video, and obviously tallying up the score, I'm leaning towards saying that old Apex had to be better. Sure, the balancing was a bit off, and some things were a lot stronger than the other, but I definitely feel like it was more fun and more fresh. That doesn't have to be due to complacency or some error by Respawn. It's simply hard to keep coming up with fresh, non-game breaking ideas when you are managing a live service game for years upon years. And while I consider the old Apex to be great and would love to play in it, maybe some type of throwback LTM Respawn? Just saying. I still think that the game is heading in a decent enough of a direction that it isn't completely unplayable just yet. Again, if you guys disagree with any points or think I missed anything, let me know in the comments. Check out the video on the screen for some more bangers, hit the like and subscribe, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Peace out.